My name is Allison Felis, and this is I'll Follow You, a podcast featuring light and lively conversations about film, music, and creative culture, coming to you from the People's Republic of Rogers Park on the far northeast side of Chicago. So, I can't think of a better reason to host a podcast than to be able to introduce you to all my brilliant friends. To inaugurate the show officially, I'm going to be chatting today with Casey Andrews. Casey is professor of English at Whitworth University in Spokane, Washington. He's the author of the book Writing Against War, Literature, Activism, and the British Peace Movement, which was published by Northwestern University Press in 2017 and has been described as a highly original, densely researched, and beautifully written work of scholarship. He's also a regular contributor to the Cresset, a journal of commentary on literature, the arts, and public affairs, which is published by Valparaiso University. His most recent piece for the Cresset is on Jim Jarmusch's film The Dead Don't Die, and next up for them will be his reflections on confession and the sacraments in Scorsese's The Irishman. Casey also contributed earlier this year to my zine, The Last Band of My Youth, with an essay on the Christian ska band Five Iron Frenzy. Casey is married to the writer and pastor Leave Larson Andrews and is also a dad, a pacifist, and one of my best and oldest friends. As we joke about at the top of the show, we've been having these kinds of wide-ranging conversations on movies since we were baby film snobs, just sitting in movie theater parking lots all over Northwest Indiana. So it only seems right that my first full-length podcast episode is an extension of the kind of talks we'd be having about these movies anyway. He and I had a chance to hang out together for a few days earlier this summer in Raleigh, North Carolina, and in the Lyft that we shared back to the airport, the driver was like, "The way you guys talk to each other, it's like listening to a podcast." So I'm not saying we recorded this because of that guy, but I'm also not saying that either. So let's get to it. So, hi, Casey.
Hi, Allison.
How are you?
I am doing okay enough to have a conversation with you about movies.
I love it.
Like something I was thinking about that we've been doing. How many decades now have we been spending too much time thinking and talking about movies?
What decade am I in? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just, for a little background, I was thinking, as the year was drawing to a close and as the decade correspondingly was drawing to a close, I was like, I'm going to make like a very nerdy and obsessive list about like what were my favorite movies over this decade. And then I was like, rather than like having this be a document that just existed on my computer, I was like, well, I'm going to make Casey talk to me about it. So
Love it.
And then, correspondingly wanted to hear, what yours were. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And my true confession starting point is that I've realized this has been the decade in which it began with having my first child and getting my first real job. And so I used to go to movies regularly and feel like I was always up on everything. And then I felt like that so dissipated for so long that like 2 years ago I was with another friend who was asking something, and I was like, I haven't even seen any of the most recent, most talked about things. However, 2019 has been my year of reactivating my cinephilia, and I was sort of suggested by a friend to get on Letterboxd, and that helped me sort of keep track of things. So I feel really up on my 2019 movies, and I also feel like there are movies from the decade that it would have been better if I'd been sitting with them for 5 years rather than kind of cramming them in right now. And so I feel a little like less equipped to do a full-blown, here's what I'm sure is the best movie, but I'm really happy to engage you on where I'm at right now with my thinking about things that probably take another decade to kind of mulch over.
Well, and actually that's perfect because I'm sort of in a similar vibe because I sort of feel like I didn't have babies, but, life gets complicated in one's 30s. And I sort of feel like, the past decade, I've not seen nowhere near the amount of film that I had in my 20s. And so I feel like that's sort of an interesting, like, oblique strategy in and of itself, like, a Brian Eno oblique strategy card. Like, what have you seen that you didn't see, like,
Yeah,
so, and yeah. And I think that that's an interesting conversation to have is like, okay, things changed in our lives. Our tastes changed probably a little bit, and our priorities changed. And through that, what did filter through? And so I think that that's an interesting discussion in and of itself. Like, what did you see as a film lover when you had these other things sort of impinging on your attention, and then sort of what percolated to the surface out of those? Yeah.
I think that's great. And that kind of cues up, unless it's too early to get to this, but I feel like prior to recording, the thing that we have continued to kick around is just the sort of surprising supremacy in this decade of Paul Thomas Anderson as someone who matters so much. And I before we started recording this, I remember saying I know that I am not in a good position to talk with eloquence about The Master, just because it feels like a movie I need to go back to 4 or 5 more times. It is one I've seen, but I will say Phantom Thread for me is the one that stands out from recency bias largely, but also life circumstances bias. So as one way kind of to float that in is like that movie being about men who are driven and obsessive about their jobs, who have women in their lives that put up with them and probably make them better. And so it's like, oh, this is hitting too close to home. And I don't know if The Master is something that you resonate with on any personal level that made it stand out for you.
Well, now we're getting straight to the hot buttons, because yes, because that was when. So when did The Master come out? I think we saw it in 2012. And Brian was just, my partner Brian was just starting to work on his first book, which was, it was through the lens of comic books, but it dealt with mental illness in World War II. And we watched the first 20 minutes of The Master, and we left, and he was like, I was genuinely afraid I was going to have to not write my book anymore, because it was like he did everything in those first 20 minutes that I thought I was going to do. And then obviously, it sort of took a different turn when it was, more focused on the Philip Seymour Hoffman character. But yeah, no. And yeah, I just love The Master. And so that was, like my joke was like, what's the number one film of the decade? The Master, just because I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, 2012, I'm the IMDb list here, but 2012, and I came to The Master late in some ways. So There Will Be Blood, 2007, and I was still at that just transition point from grad school in Chicago into the kind of visiting job, but before kids, and it was much more flexible. And so, like, Leave and I would still, my spouse and I would just go out to movies still with the regularity I kind of did when I was a grad student. And so I remember seeing that one and thinking, like, wow, there's something going on here that I have not seen this director do at all structurally. And then those years elapsed, and I just, by 2012, like, with a 2-year-old, I don't even remember The Master really coming out. What I remember is a friend saying, we know you like movies, we saw this, it's really dense, but I think it's good. We need you to watch this and explain it to us. And I was like, okay, I'll take that under advisement. And then when it was on Netflix, probably it might have been 2014 by the time I caught up with it. And I remember watching it and being kind of blown away stylistically and how commanding and demanding and elliptical the movie was. And then I went and found those friends again. I was like, okay, so I've seen it. I'm ready to talk. And they're like, oh, it's been too long. We don't know what we're talking about. So I never got to have the conversation. I also just recently on Letterboxd, I'm friends with a couple of former students who are really big film buffs, and one guy writes really great reviews on there. He recently rewatched The Master and had this list where he says the title of this movie means A, and he has this kind of interesting read about how it relates to Hoffman, B, how it relates to Phoenix, and then C, Paul Thomas Anderson.
Oh, nice.
Calling his shot. And I kind of feel that way about him.
Yeah, I just, similar, I'm glad that you brought up There Will Be Blood, because I felt like, too, that was like a real watershed in his career, because I remember being, as you probably remember, having a traumatizing viewing of Boogie Nights in college that I saw with a mutual friend of ours who was very disturbed by the content, and I was sort of excited by the filmmaking and understood her sort of reservations about all the sex and the porn and everything. And I watched Boogie Nights Against recently, and I know that people really love it, but I just feel like, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine for what it is. But then, I feel like he took this quantum leap in his just maturity as a filmmaker and with his voice, with There Will Be Blood. And I sort of feel like everything that he's done since then, inclusive of The Master and Phantom Thread and Inherent Vice, I still think about all the time. I think it was incredible. And the documentary Junoon that he did about the group of Indian musicians that Johnny Greenwood went to play with and made this incredible album. The other joke that I always make as a person who still loves the film Rushmore, I did not think in 2019 I would be like, oh yes, the Anderson that I prefer is Paul Thomas Anderson and not Wes Anderson, because I feel like Wes Anderson has like kind of gone down the toilet for me a little bit.
That's really interesting. I put Boogie Nights probably at the very top of the list of movies that I don't like, but I watch them continually, periodically going, I'm going to try this again. I bet I'll get it this time. And it never coheres for me in a way that I quite enjoy. There's something just a little like, I don't know, unfinished in certain places and overblown in other places. And I mean, you could say that about Magnolia probably too. Magnolia feels like something I would rather dwell in than Boogie Nights, but I still keep trying it, and so I don't know. Maybe next decade I'll try it again, and maybe it'll click for me someday.
Yeah, I definitely have films like that too, and definitely feel that way. Like I read one of those long oral histories where they sort of interviewed everyone who was involved in Boogie Nights. I feel like it was like on GQ or something a couple years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, and I think that is what inspired me to go back and rewatch it. And I was like, I see kind of what people like about it, but it's not for me. Like there's this amazing video clip of Liam Gallagher from Oasis, listening, somebody's like peppering him with like audio, little clips of music to see like what his response will be. And it's so wonderful because it's at a certain point he listens to something that's like super poppy, like really like young, radio friendly. And he just goes, not for me, mate. In this way where he like doesn't talk shit about it, but then so we say that all the time now, like, not for me, mate.
Just slightly sidebar again out of our decade, but with Paul Thomas Anderson, Punch Drunk Love is, as you were kind of saying, a little bit of a turning point. That's one I feel like I need to go back to, in that I kind of liked it at the time, but I feel like it's called out so often as a turning point in Anderson's career and also as the Adam Sandler movie to go back to. And Adam Sandler, for me, is having a little bit of a renaissance, partly solidified by, I don't know if you saw this article in, I think it was in Vulture, where they ranked every Adam Sandler movie. Did you see this?
No, I know that they do these rankings, but I hadn't seen that one, no.
So this one is ranking every Adam Sandler, it's a single author, I forget his name, I should look it up right now, but ranking every Adam Sandler movie not on best movies or best movies that Sandler was in, but if we define Sandler as this one kind of thing, what counts as the best version of that thing?
That's awesome.
And it's a really interesting take on it, and one that actually has made me re-see or re-understand like his Netflix deal and these 8 pictures that he's working on, that some are these ones that are comedies that are designed to be his buddies making kind of, jokes with each other, but not designed to be sort of lazy. Just kind of pulling things together, lots of Jennifer Aniston, and then these more avant-garde pieces that he's made, and that it's sort of, the argument was that we shouldn't see Punch Drunk Love as a complete weird outlier, and the one that's out or coming out right now that I'm excited to see, Uncut Gems.
Oh, I'm dying. I'm dying to see Uncut Gems. I'm so excited. Yeah.
Well, so me too, and I so last Friday night, as I was laying in a half stupor of exhaustion and stomach illness with my spouse, we watched Sandler's stand-up special, 100% Fresh, which it was a perfect thing for that time. It's one of these Netflix things, and it just made me extra excited to see Uncut Gems in relation to that. Not to move away from Anderson totally, but I am curious, have you seen other Safdie brothers? Just thinking of voices I think are really crucial for this decade. Have you seen Good Time?
No, I know you mentioned that as being with your Pattinson fandom, and I haven't seen it yet. No.
Well, I don't know their work real well, but that one certainly grabbed me this time, and their just ability to make crime, fast-paced, punchy crime stylized works that say a little bit more than just that they're about, and to use actors in ways that they have not been used before. And so, anyway, Uncut Gems. Maybe we'll go on record here and say it's gonna be great. It won't be, but I'm hoping for it. So,
no, I'm super excited about it. It was one of those things where, Brian and I, we go to the movies fairly frequently, when there's stuff that we want to see. And we'd seen the preview a couple times for Uncut Gems. And it was, I think, after the second time we'd seen it, I forget which one of us said later that day, like, you know what I think I'm excited about now is that Uncut Gems. And whoever said that, the other one was like, yeah, me too. So it's like something is in the air about that one. Yeah.
I have in mind a little bit that Amy Taubin at Film Comment, who's one of these old New York film critics, and she said that she hated Uncut Gems because she saw it the same day in a festival with, two other really propulsive, action-packed movies, and she said, I decided I was done with movies that think the only thing they have to do is pummel you. so being pummeled, and I've gathered that the sound design in Uncut Gems is just like nonstop onslaught. So I'm curious. Jesse David Fox is the name of the critic who did this. What is the best Adam Sandler movie?
Oh, nice. Nice. I will be sure to read that.
I don't know if there's more you want to say about The Master specifically. Angelica J. Bastien says that Joaquin Phoenix's posture throughout the entire movie is that of a question mark, which I think is brilliant. And you had kind of let off a while ago saying that Joaquin has been pretty high on your list of greatest actors of this decade. Do you have more to say about him in The Master or him, period?
I'm going to have to recant that after the Joker, because I just hated, I didn't hate the Joker, but it just was so dumb and so overhyped, and just the whole shenanigans around, what does this film mean? And I just thought it was really dumb. And I thought that what he was sort of attempting to do in the Joker, he'd sort of already done in The Master. And I think he's just surpassingly brilliant in The Master, just in that, in just his sensitivity and in the way that he just rides that line of sort of like mental illness / PTSD. I just think he's so good in it. And I remember reading an interview with Paul Thomas Anderson where he talks about the posture, where he said that at a certain point, he noticed him sort of building, these gestural things that he was doing as an actor throughout the filming, specifically sort of holding his kidneys, the way that he would hold his back. And he said that he just didn't talk to him about it. He was like, I realized at a certain level I was watching as if watching a child play. And he was like, to say anything to him about it was going to break the spell. And so I just let him do what he was going to do. And he was like, so that was all him. He said that he didn't give him any guidance as an actor as far as like that kind of stuff, which I love those kind of stories. Sometimes like actors, there was the whole, there's always talk about like, why do you have to be an abusive narcissistic jerk to get a performance together? But there was a level of that I sort of admired as far as like him going inside of his commitment to it, and especially like thinking about World War II. Like I said, my partner Brian, his book Captain Marvel and the Art of Nostalgia, talks a lot. Well, you read the book about World War II, and he and I, when he was in the process of writing it and doing a lot of his research, just talked about like the hangover of World War II, that like, a lot of people sort of like locate a lot of American trauma in Vietnam, which is obviously and incontrovertibly true. But I really feel like as a nation, we haven't even gotten over World War II and sort of the lies that we tell about it and about, the trauma of it that was really unexpressed by that generation who went through it, because it was sort of not sanctioned to address it, sort of socially emotionally, and just how people were equipped to deal with things. And so his one of his guiding lights in the research that he did for the book was I'm going to blank on the title, but it's Paul Fussel's book about the trauma of World War II. And so seeing the master, we just were like bowled over that we were like, oh yeah, like it's not just this like Saving Private Ryan, rah rah, go America, World War II kind of thing. It's like the aftermath of that, and just like what a mess people were when they came home, and especially these young male soldiers who, God only knows what trauma they had pre-existing the war and then going through that. And so there's something that he does in that performance that I find really, really beautiful and really heartbreaking.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, just back to Anderson being such a surprise, I wouldn't have expected the person that made these sort of good kind of crime genre things like Hard Eight and Boogie Nights being sort of a porn expose. Like, I wouldn't expect that same person to have the ability to be as seemingly knowledgeable about immediate post-World War II America, or that like 1950s fashion culture of Phantom Thread that seems like something that would take the kind of archival research that I expect from other kinds of more intellectual directors in that way. And that's just, kind of stunning. And with The Master specifically, I just finished reading this new book by Eugene McCarraher called The Enchantment of Mammon, how capitalism became the religion of modernity.
Oh, I have that on my bookshelf. Like these like 900 pages I haven't gotten to, but I'm so excited to read it.
Oh my gosh, I loved McCarraher for so long, and Tim Peebles, my good friend, got me into his essays that kept promising for decades, still working on Champs of Mammon, forthcoming, I promise. And then it finally came out, and it's, that's probably worth its own conversation about that book. But the simple thing is just how much it's about a continual hunger since maybe before Emerson, but certainly around Emerson and forward, for great American, mostly male sages who can bless and give enchantment to the market, to success, to these things that it seems like become even more acutely needed after World War II. And the Master sort of capturing like that many of us want to be mastered. We don't actually want to be the people in control. We want to be the ones subjected. And I just think Anderson's onto something in 2012 that like clearly only is getting worse and more farcical.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that's brilliant. Yeah. Cause for me, I mean, having in 2012, I was just finishing my second full year of clairvoyant training, and having been through that and the parallels between L. Ron Hubbard and the Philip Seymour Hoffman character, and just thinking about sort of like religion and spirituality and that sort of American bootstrappy religion, the way that Americans, sort of want these messianic figures and are susceptible to them. And this sort of cultiness, and it was all very much at the top of my head. And so that was what I was focused on more in the Master, like less the political aspects of it, like the sort of spiritual manipulation, I thought was, and just who better to do that than Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I just I miss him every day after his passing, and especially thanks to that performance. I mean, I'd always loved him, but he just was just gigantic in that.
Yeah, I know. Hoffman, the loss of him is, that's clearly one of the biggest losses of the decade, if not period, in terms of just performances we know he could have given, because he never gave a bad one. Like, I can't think of a bad Hoffman performance, it's just always so enriching. I was pulling up here, so Joaquin Phoenix's run, I never saw I'm Still Here. That one gets talked about usually with condescension and kind of like, did you see I'm Still Here? Is that
that's like the mockumentary that he did, right? Where he was like a hip hop guy or something? Yeah, no, I never saw it, yeah.
So that in 2010, and then 2012 is The Master, and then The Immigrant in 2013, which I didn't ever catch up with, even though
But
I know that was our friend Nick.
And that's James Gray, though, who directed Ad Astra, which I now knowing that is his career trajectory, because Joaquin Phoenix's performance in Two Lovers, also directed by James Gray, I loved back in 2008, 2009, whenever that came out. So I need to see The Immigrant.
Yeah, Two Lovers, 08. The Immigrant, but the same year, 2013, is Her. He plays Theodore in Her, which I really like. That's Spike Jonze, Scarlett Johansson is the Phone in Love.
We loved that one too. Yeah, Brian and I really, really loved that one, and especially again with Brian's sort of like deep knowledge of comics stuff. He felt like it was such a continuity with a lot of like the early sci-fi that it was they really updated that sort of Isaac Asimov-y kind of speculative fiction, but in the cheesiness of it in a really fun way.
Yeah, and there again, it's Joaquin going hard into a performance, but in this kind of like awkward dork rather than the kind of I think back to your comment on Joker, to me, I feel a little less like I want to blame Joaquin. I don't think Todd Phillips knows what he's doing there. It's just like, here, just keep throwing stuff at him and let him just like explode himself in his part, and he'll give it to you because he's got so much to give, but there's not enough handling of it that Spike Jonze can kind of like push him to go extreme in this other mode that makes him in that best actor way where you forget that he's not really like that. I love that dimension of him.
And I guess that's probably what made Joker feel so disappointing to me, was that like I was so excited by what he had done in The Master and what he had done in Her. And then it seemed like what was the movie that he did subsequently where he was sort of like, it was kind of like the Liam Neeson Taken, where he was like going to avenge a girl, you know? And I was like, well, all right.
So You Were Never Really Here, is that the one?
Yeah, must be.
Lynn Ramsey. I haven't caught up with that. I know a lot of people that really are keen on that movie who don't necessarily like that genre, so I'm curious. But after Her, he does Inherent Vice. So, I mean, that's just an incredible run. And Inherent Vice, there again, a movie where I watch it and feel like, oh, well, that's really what Joaquin Phoenix is like. that complete immersion to the point where it makes you just believe this is how this person acts, even though those are three radically different performances.
Inherent Vice is one of those films, too, that, like, I feel like you've described art this way before, where it's just like a bubble bath that I just want to crawl around in. And it's like, obviously not a pleasant film. I mean, there's like so much nastiness to it, but something about the tone that Anderson nailed with that, I just sort of feel like, I don't even know how many times I've seen it subsequently, but I just find myself sort of idly thinking about like the color palette and just sort of the acting style. And I'm just completely enchanted by everything he did with that.
So I've been kind of eagerly awaiting a new Thomas Pynchon novel when that one finally came out, and when it did, it was such a delight to get one that was digestible and not what he's published since then, but it's like, oh geez, when do I have time for another 900-page novel written in a dialect I have to learn, and like I don't know if I have a lifespan enough to read all of your books, but that one, I loved the novel so much, and then hearing that there's this adaptation coming, I'm wondering how it could be. It's such an incredibly faithful adaptation while still adding a lot of Anderson's own kind of visual stamp in a way that I say again, like how I could not have imagined him being capable of doing this kind of thing, much less some of the other major directors of his age, his generation, adapting a Pynchon novel so successfully. And then, so that movie, I read the book a couple of times. I wrote about the movie. I ended up hosting something at a film festival where I was doing a Q&A with that film. So that's one that I just genuinely deeply love that movie, and its vibe, its tone, all the kind of like wandering while Joanna Newsom says like strange things in the voiceover. I want to watch it right now.
Yeah, I'm very re-inspired as well. Yeah. No, my sort of like, out of left field theory on Anderson's like switch over in his career when he just like activated this part of himself was love. I chalk it up to Maya Rudolph. I think they got married. I think he fell in love. And I think that he just like found part of his own soul.
I mean, clearly Phantom Thread is autobiographical, isn't it? I mean,
it can't not be, right?
Like, here's a brilliant person who is not going to compromise her own brilliance, but she will also not try to overpower me in my own game. She will actually find ways to subvert the game I think I'm playing. And when I'm being obsessive about showing things correctly or framing shots perfectly, she'll be over there doing funny things of her own that are really creative. Like, it just has to be a story about that marriage.
Well, and the thing, and I remember not long after Phantom Thread, I think it, finally came out, that he did like a thing. There was like a Phantom Thread Twitter feed, like dedicated to the movie promotions. And he like got on there and was like answering people's questions. And his answers were so funny that I was like, oh yeah, this dude is not only like super smart and like super like technically just genius with the way that his films look and are constructed, but he's also loves music and is like super, super funny. So I just feel like, yeah, whatever's in the water in their home is just like doing wonderful things for the both of them.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, pivoting to a different, sort of master of his genres and the career span. Well, we got to talk about Scorsese, like crime films, Inherent Vice, and we got crime films with Wolf of Wall Street, The Irishman. Silence is in there, which is just like, is sort of akin to The Master in its own bizarre way.
And so my confession is Silence is still one of my screaming blind spots, so I have not caught up with it yet. It's actually I have it at home. I was trying to catch up with it before we were going to talk, and I didn't get to it. So shoot. But Scorsese, my quick thing with him is I'm just lumping him together at this point with several of these sort of aging or older master filmmakers who are making movies that are pretty explicitly reflections back on their whole careers. And The Irishman is probably the most sweeping of those, but I'm just really impressed with that level. And I feel like some of the press around The Irishman, certainly not all of it, because there's been a lot of positive stuff. I've always been annoyed when I read these people saying things like, "Oh, well, he's already done this. Like he did a gangster movie. Why is he doing more in a long one? Why is this long in a movie about gangsters?" And I think that seems to miss how much it's not really just a gangster movie. It's about his own movie career.
And yeah, I mean, that seems like the most petty way to talk about that film, because it's also kind of like at a certain level, you almost want someone at that stage in the career. It's like if they want to tell a really, really subtle, sweeping, deeply felt story, don't you want them to access that through the genre that they're already a master in? It's like I don't want to hear Bach's, version of Skrillex's music. It's like I want to hear Bach doing what Bach does.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel it too. I think it seems to me a lot of people that are saying that are people for whom Scorsese does gangster stuff is kind of a meme. It exists more as a cultural knowledge, like knowing he did Goodfellas and Casino, whether you've actually really sat down and watched those movies, and then not really caring all that much about what he's up to. I felt like The Irishman, in so many ways, set this really high bar and then jumped it with all the advanced warning about the de-aging stuff, which we could get into if you want, but more the runtime, which seems so forbidding, and then to essentially earn that runtime through it being like this possibility to meditate on a career and on old age. It's just impossible to think that there will ever be a movie at that budget level about old age.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. 100% agree.
And maybe there's no reason to have $180 million movies about old age, but still, it's kind of an interesting check. Yeah. So I have this piece coming out about the Irishman, which I don't know if I told you that got accepted, and so I'm written about sacraments more broadly, but focused a lot on confession as what the mode of that movie is, and I think there's a way to see confession. It's partly literal forms of confessing to your crimes. But I think in that movie, it's pretty explicitly what it means to go through a ritual of confession, even when you don't really believe in it, and when you don't think it works, but it still seems like a thing to do. And to see that, I think Scorsese, at some level, is in a kind of act of confession about announcing like what his career has been about, even and modeling that on the religion of his youth, even if it's not something that specifically means something at this moment in your life. And I find that really fascinating.
Well, and then also just, the twin obsessions of his life, Catholicism and film, and as this perfect merger point of the two. Yeah. Yeah.
And religion broadly too, you take into account Kundun and these other sort of ways he's tried to acknowledge that there's like a ritualized spirituality is something that is deeply important to him, even if he's uncomfortable with it. And I kind of love that resting in that discomfort is something I find so compelling.
Well, and you're going to need to watch Silence. It's all I'm going to say.
I read it this summer because I had never read it. I read it and I was like, okay, I'm getting ready for my watching of Silence. And then, it's partly the length. I'm not scared that I'm not going to like it. It's just like finding time for that 3-hour movie, even in my slightly more cinephiliac year I've been having.
No, I totally understand, and I'm totally just joking. But yeah, just in terms of informing that, those twin obsessions. Yeah, absolutely. So you read it then?
I did, yeah, and it was one that was taught when I was in college. It was using these great books classes, and I kind of can't imagine doing that, honestly. Like the book, at least, it's just very much lots of torture and wondering. And I hear the movie has kind of got a lot of that too, but I was having a hard time imagining teaching that book. I'm very interested to see how he'll visualize that. I'm glancing right now. It's at his decade, and so Irishman clearly is amazing capstone. I would like more Martin Scorsese movies. I would also be just totally happy if this is the end, sort of defining statement. You mentioned Wolf of Wall Street. I forget if we've ever talked about this. I know that's a really divisive movie, and I was curious. I remember you liking Leo's performance, but what are your overall feelings about that one?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theater, but it my joke is that it made me blog again. Like I had given up my old pop culture blog, Wrestling Entropy. It just sort of felt like not something I was as avidly into, and especially, as this hinge point into my early 30s when sort of my life and my schedule and my priorities changed. And so I wasn't writing for a couple of years. And then we went to see The Wolf of Wall Street, and I was like, I can't not write about this. And so that was I think the first blog post on my current blog, Queen of Peaches. And I haven't seen it since then, and I don't know how I'd feel about it now, but I just feel like DiCaprio's performance is so great in it because to me, it reads as like a meta commentary on his own film career, because I feel like all those scenes of him sort of like, being the bad boy is kind of like, well, that was him in the 90s with, he was partying a lot. And then there's, the scenes when he's, I forget what even happens, where he's drugged or whatever, where he's like crawling out to his sports car outside the restaurant. Yeah. And to me, that just reads like pure satire of his own method bullshit. Like in, what was the terrible movie when he was like sleeping inside the bear? I hated that movie. The one with
The Revenant.
The Revenant. Yeah, I hated that. And I sort of felt like, dude, you were just making fun of that performance through Wolf of Wall Street. Like, how are you doing this, like, without shame now,
Yeah, and I like your own persona, too. The 90s pussy posse era.
Right.
Decisiveness about that movie has been, and I too only just seen it the one time. I saw it in really good conditions. I happened to be in London, and it was so exciting to get to see it there and the big screen. And anyway, I really enjoyed it while I was watching it. But lots of people who I kind of respect, like critics, have been real divided about whether the thing is bloated and if it's like, okay, after the fifth time we're at a party where people are being, drunk and throwing people around and there's like prostitutes and whatever, sex workers. It's like, I get that it could maybe be a little too much, too indulgent in the images it's portraying. I tended to always cut Scorsese slack on this and just say that that's part of this amazing thing he does, which is just invest himself in the awfulness of these things without a kind of satirical commentary in quotes around it, so that you just live in it to the point where if it curdles, that's because you have a moral sensibility, and if you're just like thrilled to it, that's because you don't. Like it's some weird litmus test that he runs. So I don't know. I still think I probably like it, but I've been interested in the fact that so many people have felt like it made its point and then just kept that going for another hour.
Well, and I think it's not dissimilar to what he's doing in The Irishman, where he's playing, like you said, the length against itself, where it's like, at what point do you realize that this is all empty, to get you to that final scene where he's at where he's doing the conference and selling the pen, it's like, you need the disgusting overkill of everything that came before it in order to really have the impact of like those final shots of these people just lapping up his supposed wisdom, the Jordan Belfort character. So I think it's a real companion piece in that sense to The Irishman for me.
Yeah. And I certainly the kind of deep dive into a very hollow, shallow person who's unreflective and like, and I kind of get like people complaining that why should I spend all these hours with a shallow, hollow person? I think I still just come back to what's cool about it is that Scorsese is clearly not a shallow and hollow person, and he's investing in, and that the language of cinema is something that's providing something that's exciting and meaningful and philosophical, even if the subject matter is really reduced in certain ways.
And also, it's like, cinema gives you the chance to enjoy it, even though it's terrible, right? I mean, it's like, I think there has to be an appeal there, and it is fun to see him behaving badly, the DiCaprio and his whole crew. And so I think that, like you said, finding that point where it turns, I mean, it's like we've always said about, Tati's playtime, it's like these extended long shots where you're sort of waiting for like, when does it get funny? When has it gone on so long that it's not funny anymore? And then when does it keep going on so long that it gets funny again? I think he's sort of like doing a similar thing structurally, which like you have to really be operating at a really incredibly high level to trust yourself enough and then trust your audience to sort of like find their own way in and way out of where, what they'll tolerate. And when you realize, who's the butt of this joke here, and it's never the audience with Scorsese,
Yeah. Right.
Unlike Todd Phillips, P.S. Like,
never those are even in Rolling Thunder Review, which is another Scorsese 2019 that I quite enjoyed, but I know people were irritated by his like playing fast and loose with how a documentary should function and sort of feeling like jokes on the audience. I don't know if that's will go down as one of the greatest Scorsese films, but just capturing some of that really fantastic Dylan footage and then linking it in with other things and then turning it into a kind of film that's winking at you the whole time. I enjoyed it. Did you get a chance to see that one?
We didn't. No, I haven't seen it, and so I'm bummed, and I'll need to put it on the list. Yeah.
This is one of those things I dislike about our streaming era. Is like, so if you're not routinely like hooked into Netflix, then there are some of these things that you don't get a chance to see. You can't, like, I don't know, can you get a DVD of Rolling Thunder Review? It's so crazy that that's like a Netflix original now, and so there it lives. And I threw into that same mix. This is kind of, I guess, of the decade. The Other Side of the Wind, the final completed Orson Welles movie. That's another one that, you know, is a Netflix original at this point. Were you able to catch up with that?
Is that how they released it? I didn't realize it was a Netflix original.
Yep. So that's how it is. That's how it lives. So it, like, as far as I know, I haven't double checked recently, but for a while, like, you couldn't. There's no like Blu-ray of it. You cannot get a physical copy of
that's
Orson Welles' finished film.
That's just like just immoral. That's horrible. That's like, it reminds me like, I mean, talk about a movie that hasn't aged well, but Jerry Maguire, where there's that scene where he's like, "Oh, I can't sign that brand of trading cards, little man. So sorry," you know. But it's the same thing. Like, "Oh, I'm really sorry, you can't see this Wells film anywhere than on your like downloadable device." Like,
yeah, there's been jokes like, "Well, at least I can watch it on my iPhone." So
yeah.
Like, oh yeah, that was the way you intended. I mean, with Wells, at least you're kind of like, this is only one in a series of 100 indignities that film has gone through. So, when half the footage was owned by an Iranian sheik who was in arrears with an oil company, that was a little worse, I guess, than Netflix.
Oh God. Yeah, no, because that's a whole other separate conversation. But gotta bite the bullet and reinstall Netflix on my machine, which it's not currently on.
Yeah, no worries. And we're resisting Disney Plus at this point, but you feel like the pressure kind of creeping in. I still hang on to my physical media, but we're talking about things of this decade. I'll still say that like hard shift. There was a brief period when it felt like Netflix was kind of the savior of old movies. Like, oh look, you can actually get these things, and then it was like the complete abandonment of anything prior to the past 8 years, if that. So yeah.
No, I don't have, I mean, every once in a while, like I have a Netflix account that's kind of in the cloud, but I'm not activated to it, but it remembers me. So it's like every once in a while when there's something that I need to watch that I can't get anywhere else, like, you know, we really wanted to watch the Chappelle stand-up specials that came out at the beginning of this year. So I was like, okay. So I like briefly reactivated Netflix for the month and then canceled it again, you know.
It's probably a good way to do it. Like, just once a month, reactivate, watch a bunch of things, and then cut it off for 3 more months. Like, that's probably a good way to keep yourself honest.
It's worked for me thus far, so.
That's great.
So what else?
So here's a segue from Leo in Scorsese movies to Leo in Tarantino. So
let's get into him, man, because I did not like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
And you said, briefly said, because it was disjointed was the word I think you used, and or do you have more to say about that? I'm curious.
I just felt so. Again, like the joke that we've had for years and years is like my ability to evaluate movies is so tied to the physical circumstances and my own physical circumstances, such as how tired I am. So full disclosure, I had just flown home from 2 weeks in Ireland the day before I went to see Once a Time in Hollywood, because it came out while we were in Ireland visiting family. And so I couldn't wait to see it and was super excited and came home. And so I was probably pretty jet lagged and pretty messed up. And so I should probably watch it again to be a little fairer to it, given my my longstanding affection for Tarantino. But that being said, yeah, I felt like Leo's performance, I liked. So what he was doing in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I felt like he did that better in Wolf of Wall Street, as far as like exploiting his own persona and exploiting sort of his own vanities. Like, I think he's a very funny comedic actor when he goes balls to the wall like he does in those films. But something about it, I was like, oh, I already saw this. Like, you already did this, and you're not adding anything here for me that feels pointed in the way that Scorsese uses that vanity in Wolf of Wall Street. I don't feel like Tarantino really had control of it in the same way. I think it's definitely a unfair thing to compare it to, as we were just saying, but the way that Todd Phillips was using Joaquin Phoenix in The Joker. But I feel like it's like a similar vibe where it's like all this talent sort of just being sprayed. It just felt like a spray gun, you know? And there was stuff that I liked about it. I mean, like Brad Pitt, I talk about like a turnaround in the last decade as far as someone who I really didn't used to think much about, but now he's one of my favorite actors. I think Pitt is incredible in everything he does, and he's really, really great in that. But I just felt like the violence at the end, it's like, yeah, you've done it before, QT, and I'm not getting the same jolt out of it, and I'm not quite sure what you're saying here. And yeah, so ultimately it was kind of a downer for me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was wondering if the ending would be where the primary disjointedness comes from. That's definitely the part I feel like I have to puzzle over the most in terms of disjunction. You're flying an international flight home seems really pertinent to like the last sequence where they've been in Italy for a while and then they're like jet lag coming home for the ending. So you're on the right wavelength to the very end. All you needed was like a new bride and a sultry movie career.
Well, I think we were just about to sign the lease on our the mortgage on our condo, so that was similar, yeah.
Perfect. If only you had a bottomless Bloody Mary the entire way, you would have been great. So I would say, sort of the Leo performance goes, that's one that I do think you might give a second look to, in the sense that, different from Wolf of Wall Street, there is a kind of like aching vulnerability underneath this performance that I don't think is there with Jordan. Alfred Jordan is sort of what's his name? Jordan some of the B, right?
Balfour, right? Yeah.
Balfour. That one has it's so smug the whole way through, and Rick Dalton is sad that he's failing and can't live up to it, and in his interpersonal speech stutters and has this kind of way that he's masking what appears to be, and what in interviews both of those guys have said they drew from some real life people, these unaddressed mental health problems that he's kind of covering with alcohol, and that is all kind of hazing over that character. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening with that performance, and I would say for me, DiCaprio is one of those people who I used to either not think I didn't like or just not think much about, and I've now sort of come around on. I used to always go, why is Scorsese putting him in all these movies? And now I feel like I kind of look forward to his stuff. So that would be just my initial reaction with him. I think that the tone that he finds that Tarantino finds in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I have not seen another Tarantino movie that I've actually gotten choked up during as much as this one. Like, there's a kind of mournfulness and a hangout vibe that I think probably plays really badly if you're not sort of able to sort of be attentive to it. And it may be that it would never really work for you, but it's really hit me more emotionally than any of his other work, and partly in that same way I've been talking about with Scorsese reflecting back on a career. I would be kind of fine if Tarantino made no more movies after this. I think this is a commentary on everything he's done. It pulls everything he's done together. It looks back on his life at the end of an era in which his kind of movie making at this sort of level and with these kind of technologies is over. And all of that I found really elegiac and moving, to the point that both times I saw it, so I saw it twice in the theater, and that ending with the violence, I do think it raises some real questions that I always have about, had Tarantino ever just gotten some education in a normal way, or some socialization in a normal way? Like, there may be some things that he wouldn't include. I think there's some tone deafness in the way the violence is handled, but as a way of having an extreme fantasy that I think accentuates the fact that this fantasy did not happen, and what happened was that these lives were all extinguished. There's a way in which it feels like I found it kind of mournful in its gleeful excess, because the excess is so ridiculous and over the top, not realistic. I found myself feeling more mournful about Sharon Tate's life, and that part of it got me in that final crane that lifts up over top of her house as things are happy in a way that they never were. That, to me, just gets me so emotionally. and in a place that I don't think, like I said, I don't think any other Tarantino movie hits me in that same emotional place. So that's not really a defense. It's just where I was at emotionally with it.
No, which I love. I love that. Yeah, that's what you were responding to in it. And I guess that part of what I was trying to kind of puzzle out with the ending, and because I love Inglourious Bastards and the oh, now I'm even Death Proof. I love and those are super super violent, and even Django, even the end of Django Unchained, that I sort of feel like he, in those movies, was sort of seeking to redress these large social ills, so you have like the Nazis, and then you have like sexism and you have slavery, and I feel like there were these big impersonal things that sort of worked through that approach, whereas I don't know what he was like, quote unquote, destroying at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, beyond just like, oh, I'm sad about Sharon Tate, which is, of course, it's sad and it's terrible, like what happened to her. But I sort of feel like the ire at the Manson family, which again, they're disgusting and it was bad, but I also sort of felt like that's not really emblematic of anything bigger than itself. Like those murders. Like I know a lot of people are kind of like, oh, it was the end of an era and the end of innocence in America. But like, innocence in what way? Like, I don't know. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I sort of felt like that purge that comes at the end, and that like release in violence. Like I love it at the end of Inglourious Bastards, because you're like, yes, Hitler, bring him down. This fantasy. It's like, yes. Smash stuntman Mike in the face, like get rid of this rapey, nasty dude. Whereas with this, I'm kind of like, yeah, like these brainwashed kids. I don't know. I'm sort of not super into this idea of like exacting this violence on people who were brainwashed, basically.
Yeah, I still kind of place it as this is where I don't trust Tarantino's intellect or just his handling of history, in that I kind of take it that he basically has the same level of understanding and outrage about Nazis, slavery, and kind of the end of a easygoing free love Hollywood. I think that he thinks those are equivalent, and I think obviously to point out that he's wrong. I get that. I guess I sort of feel like I want to sort of say there's something interesting about finding a new space for history rewritten here, and that it's safer in some ways to imagine killing Hitler, to imagine fixing an emblematic thing that happened in Hollywood that has a kind of ripple effect. I heard him now in interviews talk that he's pretty convinced that Manson specifically changed so much about kind of Hollywood as its function, and not just sort of on the grounds that there was a kind of openness in Hollywood in that time that was lost, and that it was a signal of a turning point to a change in the studio system and a change in how the culture functioned, and a turn towards a certain kind of corporatization, and that this is a sort of like imaginary intervention in that. And on grounds that are sort of like ideological, like I'm opposed to all the things. I'm even opposed to shooting Hitler. So like all the ideology I think is really bad. I just find the sort of that shooting of Hitler, I do get the kind of cheering thrill, and with a little bit of sourness, because you have to remember that he already showed you like a movie where Nazis were cheering for people getting shot, and then you were supposed to feel bad. So there's like a little twist in it that Tarantino thing he does. And in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I felt like it on so many levels ideologically problematic, but sort of in the emotions of it, what it says about what this little fantasy bubble could be redeemed by, that gets worked out, and it's got this kind of sweetness to it because of how much Tarantino has affection for that little strange little moment in Hollywood. And I say that fully accepting all the criticisms have been like, and look how it's full of white people, and look how women don't have big parts, and all these problems in it ideologically, but it's still somehow hit an emotional register that I don't cheer at the ending of with the violence. I find it sort of like sorrowful and wistful in a way.
All right, I buy that. I totally buy that. I totally 100% buy that. And yeah, I'm had wanted to re-see it again anyway, but definitely I will keep that take in mind. Because yeah, I mean, as far as all the like hangout stuff, like I totally understand, and I think that is where my jet lag probably was least fair to it, because I think I just was like a little antsy sitting there because I was physically tired. But I can see where the pleasures of those early kind of hangout sequences. I can understand how I would probably enjoy that in a different mood.
I'd be interested to hear if you do find that to be different. I don't know. Back to Amy Taubin, she was like, that Tarantino movie needed 45 minutes cut out of it. It was all that boring stuff in the middle. But The Irishman, I loved it. I saw it twice. And like, I don't know if you can get that like, I get that you're accessing a different sense of hangout, but I kind of think with her, it's like, I like hanging out with old people for a long time. But yeah, the other Tarantino of the decade that we could briefly revisit is just that I know that you like I think most people hated The Hateful Eight, and that's one I don't know if I've got anything that even amounts to anything close to defense other than a weird sense that I just like being in that movie, and it's partly probably how I saw it. But I saw it twice in the theater, once in Spokane and digital, and once in the roadshow version in London. And they made an announcement ahead of time that Tarantino had been in the theater 2 days prior, sitting and watching with the crowd. So like I was kind of thrilling to that, and then I've seen that thing most Januaries. I come back and I watch it, and every time I watch it, I'm like, I know people hate this movie, but I don't know, something about the dialogue and the cold weather and the Ennio Morricone score and just the overall nastiness is pretty unrelenting. There's some things about it I don't like, but it's more on like levels of plotting, and everything else about mood that most people hate, I find a ridiculous, unexplainable affection for.
No, I love that. Yeah, because we saw it in the Roadshow edition at the Music Box here in Chicago on Christmas Day, like whatever year that was that it came out. And so I was like, oh no. I was like, why? So yeah, I don't know that I'm necessarily, in contrast to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I don't know that I would go back to reinvestigate what you found appealing in it, but I can understand, because it looked so beautiful. I mean, the cinematography is just like out of control, gorgeous, and I can understand, yeah, sort of being trapped in this little cabin with these actors. I can see where you would have sort of a perverse attraction to it.
Yeah, I feel like it's one that I just kind of hit its wavelength, and I can't shake that. And every time I've heard anyone criticize it, I'm always like, oh, what you're saying is totally true. Like it's nasty. It's the plotting problem that he wanted to make an Agatha Christie story, but unlike Agatha Christie, who starts at the end and then writes her way backwards, he thought that'd be boring. So he wrote a mystery where he didn't know where it was going, which is why the mystery is so bad. so poorly written when it gets to like the plot levels, and like, oh, I know, there's a guy under the stairs. Like, okay, he's under the stairs. You clearly made that up in the moment. You could have made that up the day of shooting. That's how bad that crap stuff. And it would have been so much better if they found like a twist for Jennifer Jason Leigh rather than the twist being that you expect there's a twist, and so therefore there's no twist. Like, that's the latest fake out. But now it's just like, oh, and now it's just okay that we were beating her up the whole time. That's so terrible. And yet, when it gets to that Roy Orbison song at the end, I just find myself like cackling. Oh my gosh, yeah. And some of it's anti-Americanism I kind of love too, but yeah. Anyway, I won't. That's my point, I will stop there. Put a fork in me. I'm done.
No, I love it. I love hearing your joy in it, and especially given that it's indefensible joy. I respect that more than if you had like tried to give me some argument about like what it was actually about. Like the fact that you're like, this is trash, and I love it. Like I respect that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do it. Are there any other people that you would say? So we've kind of hit a lot of the big old masters. Are there any other like people you'd say are new directors of the decade, new voices, or my other category I've been wondering about was blind spots, like things you feel like you should catch up with that you really hope to see. But I'm especially interested right now in are new directors, new voices of the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm definitely where my sort of decrease in going out to movies and in renting movies has come into play is that like just that, playing it safe, kind of like, oh, I like this director and so I want to see what they're up to. So I get in sort of that vicious circle of not seeing a ton of new stuff. And but definitely Jordan Peele. I mean, how can you not put Jordan Peele on that list? I think he's obviously outstanding and is going to have a long career in front of him. And I think that the thing that I'm interested in as far as voices is almost less directors and more actors. I mean, thinking about, specifically Jordan Peele and a lot of the actors that he's worked with, obviously like Daniel Kaluuya, I think is going to be like, I think we're going to look at him in the way that people are looking at Scorsese and De Niro at the end of his career. I just think that everything that he's doing is so exciting, like Queen and Slim. I know I understand some of the criticisms where people are coming from with that, but I really, really enjoyed that one a lot. And obviously Get Out, and then Lakeith Stanfield as well. Like I think he's just fantastic, and I'm really back to Uncut Gems. I'm really excited to see his performance in that because the part in Get Out was a lot smaller for him. But Sorry to Bother You, I just think is one of the films of the decade. It's just so brilliant, and he's so good in it.
Yeah, I would definitely, and right. So Sorry to Bother You as heralding perhaps a new filmmaking voice too, if he continues to make stuff. You never know where that director is going. Whose name just escaped me? Who's the director's name?
Boots Riley, baby. Boots Riley.
Boots Riley. There you go. Yeah. So whether he will keep doing stuff, Jordan Peele definitely seems interesting. Do you have thoughts on Greta Gerwig? Are you a Greta Gerwig person at all?
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm super, super excited. I mean, speaking of things to see on Christmas Day, we are going on Christmas Day to see Little Women, and I'm super excited about it. Yeah. And I just loved Lady Bird. I thought it was just phenomenally good.
Okay. Yeah. And she's someone who, because of some of those, I'd seen Frances Ha a little earlier, but I feel like now I kind of watch for her things where she's acting in or collaborating with, and they kind of were elevated by my affection for Lady Bird and Frances Ha.
It was so funny that I just was having a conversation with a coworker who's slightly younger, and she literally didn't realize that Greta Gerwig had been an actress. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, go see Frances Ha. She's really good in it. And she was like, oh, okay, I'm going to check that out. So I was like, wow, that's like a cool level of I don't even know what that Greta Gerwig has gone through. The glow up, as the children say, in her career, where people sort of don't even realize that she was anything but a director, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, that is really cool. And some of the roles I've seen her play, she also transforms herself quite a bit, and it can be kind of hard to track her doing that too.
No, that's true. Yeah.
So the other director that I feel like is really high on my list these days in terms of new people is Ari Aster, which I would bet is probably not someone you'll go to given that he's kind of scary. So Hereditary was the one he did last year that, got all this buzz, like scariest movie ever. And it's scary, but it's mostly just so deeply rich in its investigation of trauma and grief and in a slightly, and then how much he loved all these different movies. It's a little goofy by the end. But his follow-up, which he didn't expect to make as quickly, but financing came together faster than they thought. He had to go right into it, is Midsommar, and Midsommar was, to me, I put that very high of my favorite movies of the summer. Did you see Midsommar by any chance?
I didn't, just because, yeah, I'm kind of a baby about like scary stuff, like you said, but I've heard so many glowing reviews of it that I think that I'm going to have to like do the thing where I spoil the plot twists for myself so that I'm not like on pins and needles about the scariness of it, and sit down and watch it. Because I read like a really amazing article just a day or two ago about the sound design in it. The guy from Hex and Cloak who did all the soundtrack work, and I was like, oh man, and enough people that I respect their opinions, including you, have said how great it is, and so I'm gonna have to like buckle down and deal with my skittishness and watch it.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought Hereditary was more scary in the sense of like lurking dread and music needling you as you're going to see something, and then like things kind of exploding in front of you, and it's horrible. Midsommar, I mean, kind of the not so secret byline, and what some people didn't like about it is they're like it kind of just sets up something that you think is going to happen, and then it does, and so you just sort of watch it sort of unfold. And to me, it was one of the most profound movies I've seen, maybe ever, about how ritual helps us engage with death, and that essentially our current construction of middle-class American culture does a lot of things to try to help us insulate or move around facing the fact that we all die. And this movie imagines a kind of extremity culture in which there's no hiding from that, and it's possibly it's horrific and awful, and possibly it's a release. And I had that take on it. I thought maybe I was crazy because a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's not how awful cults are. It's about Trump's America and cults." And I kind of like, okay, I think the cult's kind of happy. And then I heard Emily Vanderwerf. Are you familiar with her stuff at all?
No.
So she I was aware of her for a while when she was Todd Vanderwerf, published a lot and a podcast and showed up in a lot of different podcasts, and then just in the past year came out as a woman and is and was on this podcast called Good Christian Fun that's like mostly like kind of making fun of Christian pop culture, and I sometimes listen to it because it hurts too much. I can't, but she was on and she was talking about Last Temptation of Christ and what an amazing film that was, and how it and how it relates to her now. And then Midsommar is her favorite movie in the last few years because of how it engages with this idea of the body and ritual, and yeah, so I felt confirmed in my read on this. So anyway, Ari Aster, just in terms of sheer like filmmaking, his poise and how he handles things, he feels really smart to me. And then just kind of capturing some ideas that we don't normally see, especially not in just kind of average everyday horror films. So
well, and then
that's my little plug.
I love it. No, I'm gonna have to see Midsommar, and we will touch base and we will talk about it. But in terms of sort of like directors who have made scary movies, I'm blanking on his name, but it's the guy who directed The Lighthouse, which I know that we had divergent views of The Lighthouse.
So that's Robert Eggers, and he did The Witch prior to that. And The Witch, I thought The Witch, a lot of it is pretty great, and he is like a historian of early America and became that in order to work on the film, which he's been working on for years and years. And I think it's gorgeously made and well written. There's a little line on it that I share, which is I think the ending is a fumble, and it's a fumble because even though there's some things all along that are kind of like explicit images, you can still kind of take those explicit images as maybe this is like a little bit of a dream, or it's how they feel what's happening in the moment. And the ending is just sort of like, no, it's all real. This is all really happening, and here's like big special effects. And I was like, oh, come on, don't make them all real. Like, keep it in my head. That's much scarier. So, and more interesting. So I found that one visually audacious and interesting, and I like that Robert Eggers and Ari Aster are actually really good friends, and there's a fantastic A24 podcast conversation between the two of them, where they decided, almost a little like what we're doing right now, where they were like, we want to be friends, we want to talk about stuff, and we want to talk about our movies, but we don't want to promote our movies, so let's talk about Bergman instead. And so they talk about Bergman and just like riff on Bergman movies, and then we'll be like, that reminds me of the thing you do in your movie. Like, oh, thank you, I was trying to do that. And so it's a really cool interview with the two of them, and just thought of these guys like loving these kind of austere Swedish movies, and then making their own like surprisingly commercial movies, even though they're very difficult. That to me, I just enjoy that that's out there.
Well, and that's funny because it's like I think at a certain level, since I hadn't seen any of these movies, I thought they were all directed by the same guy. I mean, I knew they were directed by different people, but I could never keep straight like who did which film and which film came first and which came second. So I love knowing that they're buddies because that makes sense in my brain.
Yeah, there's a lot of these like three named white dudes who work for A24, and there's some questions to be raised about why is it still my people that are getting all the work, but that are making these kind of elevated horror or other things in that supposed genre. And I've been intrigued with Trey Edward Schultz is the other guy who's in that same wheelhouse as Krisha, which was have you seen Krisha?
No.
Okay, so Krisha, it's shot like a horror film, but there is nothing horrific at all that happens. It is simply a family having Thanksgiving together, and it's all about how scary it is to just simply have awkward conversations with your passive-aggressive family, and it's like pushed in slow with music swelling as your uncle is like, yeah, how's that job going? Well, you getting paid any more than you used to get paid? Probably not. You're not that good at it, are you? And it's like the camera's pushing in on it. It's so kind of archly funny and just like the best representation of the family. And then he followed that up with It Comes at Night, which is a horror movie that has no horror in it, and it's just like family stuff that's being worked out. And then Waves is the one that's out right now that I haven't seen, about kind of a Black American family that.
Oh yeah, that preview I really was psyched about. Like I haven't caught up with it, but the preview was definitely on my radar as something that I wanted to check out. I didn't realize that was him.
So and I can totally understand lumping all of those movies and all those people all together. It's all that whole A24 world of finding. It's like one of the few spaces that some interesting indie stuff is happening and getting a lot of attention.
Yeah. No, the A24, they're definitely like, whenever I see that logo, I'm like, okay, I'm in pretty good hands now.
Yep.
But yeah, The Lighthouse, I just felt was like really vapid. I just didn't like it at all. I just felt like he's clearly a guy that knows and loves film a lot, but then just hasn't quite figured out a way to improve on the genres and the films that he loves and bring them forward in a way. Like I felt like, it's kind of like Greta Van Fleet, the band. It's like they sound like Led Zeppelin, so it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't I just listen to Led Zeppelin? It's kind of like if I'm watching The Lighthouse, like why wouldn't I just then go watch a David Lynch movie?
Yeah, Lynch is the kind of It's funny. My program assistant came to my office and said, my husband made me go watch this movie called The Lighthouse. Have you seen it? I was like, oh, I loved it. She was like, it felt like homework someone was assigning to me. It's like I had to like think about all the different parts, and I was like, I didn't enjoy it. It was kind of too much, and it just gross in other places. And yeah, I don't know. I may have come in primed because I like Robert Eggers a bit, but I felt like some of what it was doing and creating all these sort of echoes and resonances, and it felt to me like Yeats's play Purgatory, which is you're never sure if there's there's an old man and a young boy, and they're kind of torturing each other. You're never quite sure, is this because this is the same person at different points in life, or is this a statement about the ways that we trouble each other depending on our ages and generations, and so I really got into kind of watching all those little things come together. I see what you're saying about the Lynch stuff. It felt more coherent than something like Eraserhead, in the sense that Eraserhead, I feel like is never going to answer any of these questions, whereas The Lighthouse feels like the puzzle pieces were more there for me. But Yeah, Lynch, and probably there's a lot of, given the love of Bergman, there's probably a lot of that washed out black and white, and probably some of those, um, you know, Winter Light and some of the Through Glass Darkly, Persona, some of those 60s Bergman um, mess with your mind movies. So there probably is some leaning into it there. But
well, and big Kubrick at the end too, with the big light light blast was very Kubrickian to me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I may have also just been trying to get some additional things. It's like, I'm here at an AMC in Spokane, and this is playing. I can't believe that, like, this is something that still makes it to the screen. That's something that's weird. That I feel like, we do have some art house movies that make it, but it's kind of the world of Disney Marvel. It's kind of what I expect to find on all screens. So that Robert Eggers has kind of gotten through a little bit is interesting.
Well, we should take this as an opportunity to have a sidebar about your love for Robert Pattinson, because like I going into the movie was really excited to see The Lighthouse because I was like, yes, Pattinson's got such a great look. And then I left the movie and I went, Pattinson got such a great look, and that's all.
So I thought it was a model of that review that Rosenbaum gave us. I forget what the movie is now, but it was like Ryan Gosling and Anthony Hopkins in a film together, quite a while ago. It was a courtroom movie, and Rosenbaum said the thing to watch in this movie is how the two actors with completely different acting styles working at each other, and I mean that was precisely what was happening. That so apparently in the making of The Lighthouse, they had a limited time to shoot it, but they rehearsed it for quite a while in spaces where they just taped the floor. And Eggers said, okay, so we need to work through the blocking pretty extensively. So you got the script, come in, but please don't act into these roles. Just say the lines so you can hear what they are, but then we want to just get blocking. We're going to do this for weeks. And Pattinson said, I really can't do but a couple of takes, and I can only do in most acting, and so even to walk through the blocking like that was tough for him. Defoe, as a stage guy, apparently acted at that same full bore that you see in the movie every single walkthrough, every single day for weeks. The thought of him just like and Eggers like, yeah, it was a little much. Like we were in this small space, and Pattinson was trying to be quiet and not get into it, and Defoe was just like shouting at him and like chewing on his pipe. Like, so the thought that was happening from the rehearsal on just cracks me up about that. So I thought he was doing some interesting things in there, but I would say if you want Pattinson, I think it's doing so much and resonating with it is High Life, the Claire Denis movie, where it's one of those like very little dialogue, but he's telling you so much about decades of this guy's life out in space with his child, and so those ones. Good Time, where he's playing this New York low-ranking criminal and just feels immersive in those parts. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm reading it alongside the range of Pattinson, maybe on its own. It doesn't hold up as well, but I really liked it. And also just the thought of like how annoyed he was and how good that was for the part.
Right. Yeah.
My other tidbit on that is that in one interview, they asked Eggers, how did you get that to look like you were burying Willem Dafoe? Like they're like, it kind of looks like you're throwing all this stuff in his mouth. Was it like cocoa powder or something? And Eggers pauses and was like, we buried Willem Dafoe in dirt. Like that's a real shot of dirt just being poured in his mouth.
Oh my God.
He was just so like game for it. He was like, we're just gonna do like the producer like, please don't do more than 2 takes of this. But like they just like filled his mouth with dirt. So anyway, I don't know. The extremity of the creation of this thing, which fits the extremity of how Robert Eggers thinks about everything, that's me getting a joy that maybe isn't there as much on screen as it is in the apparatus around it, but I still like it. But yeah, do you have summative thoughts about the decade?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Good question. Yeah. No, just looking back through my list here, I mean, one of the things that was sort of standing out to me that we didn't really get a chance to touch on was documentaries. Like, I feel like I saw way more documentaries, and I think that's just because they were more present. I think there was, clearly a market that had sprung up for them, and a lot of things that really stuck with me. I thought that the film worker documentary about the guy, the actor who was sort of apprenticed to Kubrick for a number of years was incredibly beautiful. And like I said, Junun, the Paul Thomas Anderson sort of concert documentary about this creation of this album in India, I really loved. The Grace Jones documentary, Blood, Light, and Bomby, was like incredible. And in terms of sort of like a documentary being slow and boring and letting that be meaningful. So yeah, that was, other than just like, shit that I liked, I felt like that was a notable thing about my experience watching films over this decade.
Yeah. I think the technological shift too, that digital is so cheap now that I think that's allowed documentaries to, and the camera's so small, like you can, the number of times I've heard people say, can you believe that this footage was picked up in places like Afghanistan or whatever, the act of killing Joshua Oppenheimer, where they're just getting this material that you would not have been able to get just technologically 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And so, how about you? Like, what's... Sorry?
Oh, sorry. To throw onto your doc list, too, the quasi-documentary Chloe Zhao doing The Rider, which is like playing with the notion of documentary by making a fictional movie out of the real experiences of a rodeo rider who's been injured and people around him, and sort of blending those forms. I find that to be a pretty impressive, and she, I think, is somebody to watch. Hopefully she'll survive being enlisted by Marvel, but she's gone from The Rider to now into the MCU, so we'll see what happens.
So yeah, any other summary thoughts from your point of view from films that you either loved or stuck with you or feel like have changed the way that you think about stuff? Or
in my list, I'll name just quickly two more kind of old masters that have made these like summative career arcing works. Giajanka, his movie that came out this year, Ash is the Purest Light. I don't know enough of his works to know how well he's done this, but it's apparently a retrospective of all this stuff that's done in this kind of very exhilarating gangster story or crime story, but not really. And it uses different kinds of cameras to capture the different phases of this woman's life. The cameras being the kind that would have been available during the decade when she's living this one part of her life. And
it's cool.
So cool and interesting in retrospective. Agnes Varda, who I am only at the early edge of getting to know, but like that she's continued to make these self-investigative things, and that her last work, Varda by Agnes, is looks like one more documentary investigation of her life. I have an affection for her because of teaching Chloe from 5 to 7 so many times and enjoying that. So those kind of old masters retrospecting, and I'll just throw a quick shout out to Godard as one of those movies I got to see in a theater that I will never get to see in this way again. The Spokane International Film Festival, very surprisingly, a couple years ago now, got Goodbye to Language, which was the movie that he did in 3D. And so, like, there's no other place you'll ever get to see Godard in 3D because there's no market. And one of the things he did is that, so apparently 3D film is made partly by, you have two cameras at different points of perspective, and they shoot the same image, two different points, and that's why the image is blurry, and then the glasses bring that together in this richer, three-dimensional image. What Godard decided to do was to shoot, at times, two different images with those two different camera setups, so that there are these moments where, like, a couple is breaking up, and they get blurry, and when you close one eye, you can only see the husband on one side of the room and thinking something, and when you close the other eye, you can only see the wife on the other side of the room.
Holy shit.
It keeps playing with all these moments where 3D is violating the rules of 3D. And so just to say that Godard, it is almost 90, and he is still taking whatever our current most obsessive mainstream form of cinema is and pushing its boundaries. That to me is what I love.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's fantastic. I hadn't heard anything about that, and I love it. I totally love it.
So going forward, we hope it's a good next decade. Maybe I'll continue my cinephilia from 2019. I gotta continue at this pace. Maybe I'll have to catch up in 2029. I'll watch all the movies that come out next year.
Well, it's like, I feel like, I don't know, I think it was like Matt Damon or somebody said, like, you should vote on the Oscars 10 years after the movie came out. Yeah. He was like, in 1997, of course it's not Titanic, it's LA Confidential, you know? So I feel like we can maybe do our own version of that and maybe reevaluate 10 years down the line what's coming out now.
I love it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for initiating this idea, and I really enjoy this opportunity to get to do something that like you and I often had got to do in like late nights in parking lots, like after seeing a movie, be like, no one else in Indiana cares about this, but here's the thing we're going to talk about. I tell those stories a lot to my film classes about like knowing I was a cinephile after walking out of Eyes Wide Shut and being one of two people that liked it. So.
formative film going experience for me as well. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. No, so thank you, so much too for being willing to talk through some of these things, because like I said, in trying to encompass the decade, I can't imagine anyone else who would challenge me, but then also come at me with sympathy for when we disagreed. So thank you for that.
I love it.
So I hope you enjoyed that chat and found it as fruitful as I did. Aside from being a very dear friend, Casey is also one of the most voracious readers and watchers of movies that I know. So I always come away with a to-read and to-watch list about a mile long anytime that we talk. So I think today one of my biggest takeaways is that I definitely need to make time to watch Midsommar, and of course go back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood one more time as well. So keep an eye out for his upcoming piece about the Irishman, which will be appearing soon in the Cresset, and do check out his marvelous book, Writing Against War. In the meantime, you can always find me online at queenofpeaches.com and intermittently on the socials as well. I'm Allison Felix, and this has been I'll Follow You. Bye for now.